The crack of a pistol shot shattered the morning stillness, sending a flock of startled birds into the clear Colorado sky as Blaire Thompson's runaway wagon careened toward the rickety wooden bridge spanning Eagle River. Her white-knuckled grip on the reins did nothing to slow the panicked horses as they thundered forward, the wheels of her wagon throwing up clouds of dust along the narrow trail leading to Leadville. The year was 1879, and Blaire was about to discover that the journey to her new life would take an unexpected turn. "Whoa!" she screamed, pulling back on the reins with all her strength, but the horses were beyond reason, spooked by the gunshot that had come from somewhere in the dense pine forest flanking the trail. The wagon hit the bridge at full speed, the weathered planks groaning in protest beneath the weight. Blaire felt the first board give way with a sickening crack, then another. Time seemed to slow as the middle section of the bridge collapsed, sending splinters of wood into the rushing waters below. The horses broke free, making it to the other side, but the wagon lurched to a stop, its front wheels on solid ground while the rear hung precariously over the yawning gap, balanced on what remained of the damaged structure. Blaire felt herself sliding backward as the wagon tilted. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled for purchase, her fingers clawing at the wooden seat. The remaining section of bridge creaked ominously, threatening to give way at any moment. "Don't move," a deep voice called out. Blaire twisted her head to see a tall figure on horseback emerge from the tree line on the far side of the bridge. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and approached cautiously, testing each board before putting his full weight on it. "The whole thing's going to collapse," Blaire warned, her voice tight with fear. "Just hold on," the man replied, inching closer. He wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dusty denims, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a revolver strapped to his hip and determination set in his jaw. The wagon shifted again, and Blaire let out an involuntary cry as she felt herself sliding further toward the edge. The cowboy lunged forward, his strong hand grasping her wrist just as the wagon gave way completely, plunging into the river below with a tremendous splash. Blaire dangled over the rushing water, held only by the cowboy's grip. Their eyes met hers wide with terror, his steady and determined. With a powerful heave, he pulled her up onto what remained of the bridge. "I've got you," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos of the moment. His arm encircled her waist, holding her firmly against him as they carefully made their way back to solid ground. Once safe on the riverbank, Blaire collapsed to her knees, her whole body trembling. The cowboy knelt beside her, his hand still on her shoulder as if afraid she might tumble back toward danger if he let go. "Thank you," she managed, looking up at her rescuer. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, with a strong jawline shadowed by a day's growth of beard. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. "Yates Quinn," he said, tipping his hat. "You're a long way from anywhere, miss." "Blaire Thompson," she replied, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "I was headed to Leadville. My uncle owns the mercantile there." Yates nodded, his gaze drifting to the rushing water where pieces of her wagon were already disappearing around the bend. "Well, Miss Thompson, looks like your plans just got a bit more complicated." Blaire followed his gaze, the full impact of her situation sinking in. Everything she owned had been in that wagon: clothes, supplies, the small nest egg she'd saved to start her new life, and most importantly, the deed to her uncle's store. Uncle Morris had passed 3 months ago, leaving the business to her in his will, but without that document she had no proof. "My things," she whispered, a wave of despair washing over her. Everything I had was in that wagon. Yates studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Leadville's still a good 10 miles from here. My ranch is closer, about 2 miles upstream. We can go there, get you sorted out, and figure what to do next. Blaire hesitated, weighing her options. She was alone in unfamiliar territory with no supplies, no transportation, and night would fall in a few hours. The sensible choice was clear, even if propriety suggested otherwise. "I would be grateful for your help, Mr. Quinn," she said finally. "Just Yates," he corrected, offering his hand to help her to her feet. "Let's collect your horses first. They can't have gone far." As predicted, they found the horses grazing nervously in a meadow not far from the bridge. Yates approached them with a calm, confident manner that soon had them settling under his touch. He rigged a makeshift harness from what remained of their tack. "You ever ride bareback, Miss Thompson?" he asked, leading one of the horses to where she stood. "Please call me Blaire," she replied, then admitted, "and no, I haven't." Yates nodded, then clasped his hands to form a stirrup. "Put your foot here, I'll boost you up." With his help, Blaire found herself atop the horse, adjusting her skirts as best she could while maintaining some semblance of modesty. Yates mounted his own horse and took the lead rope for her second horse. "Hold on to the mane if you need to," he advised. "Just relax and move with the horse." They set off at an easy pace, following a trail that wound alongside the river. Blaire's body ached from the tension of her near-death experience, but as they rode, she found herself watching her rescuer. There was an easy grace to the way he sat his horse, as if man and animal moved as one. His shoulders were broad beneath his worn shirt, his back straight despite the relaxed posture. "That shot we heard," she ventured after they'd ridden in silence for a while. "Was someone hunting?" Yates glanced back at her, his expression serious. "Maybe or maybe not. There's been trouble in these parts lately. Claim jumpers and the like, trying to muscle in on the silver mines." "Is that why you were by the bridge?" "No," he replied. "I was checking my fence line. Got cattle that like to wander if I don't keep the fences tight." He paused, then added, "Lucky for you I was." Blaire couldn't argue with that. If Yates hadn't come along when he did, she'd likely be dead, swept away by the river's current. "Very lucky," she agreed quietly. They crested a small rise, and Yates's ranch came into view. It was larger than Blaire had expected, a sturdy 2-story house built of logs and stone. A large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings spread across a clearing backed by forest on one side and opening to grazing land on the other. "Welcome to Shadow Creek Ranch," Yates said as they approached. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's beautiful," Blaire replied honestly. The setting sun cast the buildings in a golden glow, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. As they rode into the yard, the front door of the house opened, and an older woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she squinted at them with curious eyes. "Yates Quinn, who have you brought home now?" she called. "Trouble, as usual, Mrs. Winters," he replied with a slight smile. "This is Miss Blaire Thompson. Her wagon went into Eagle River when the old bridge collapsed. She'll be staying with us tonight." Mrs. Winters's expression softened immediately. "Land's sakes, child, you must be half frozen and wholly terrified. Come inside and get warm." Yates helped Blaire dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, she was very aware of how close they stood, of the woodsy scent of him mixed with leather and horse. Then he stepped back, tipping his hat. "I'll see to the horses. Mrs. Winters will take good care of you." Blaire followed the older woman into the house, finding herself in a spacious kitchen warmed by a large cook stove. The savory aroma of stew filled the air, making Blaire suddenly aware of how hungry she was. "Mrs. Winters is your wife?" Blaire asked. Accepting the cup of hot tea the woman pressed into her hands, the older woman let out a hearty laugh. "Goodness no, child. I'm the housekeeper. Have been since Yates's father was running this place. My Samuel, God rest his soul, was the foreman here for 30 years before the pneumonia took him 5 winters ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Blaire murmured. Mrs. Winters nodded her acknowledgement. "Now, let's find you some dry clothes." "You're about the same size as Yates's sister was." "Was?" Blaire couldn't help asking. A shadow crossed Mrs. Winters's face. "The Quinn family's had its share of sorrows, but that's not my story to tell. Come along now." Upstairs, Blaire was shown to a bedroom with simple but comfortable furnishings. Mrs. Winters rummaged in a chest, producing a calico dress that, while a bit outdated in style, was clean and well-maintained. "This should fit you well enough for now. The washroom is through that door. There's hot water in the reservoir. I'll leave you to freshen up and come down when you're ready. Supper will be on the table shortly." Left alone, Blaire took stock of her situation. In a single day, she had lost everything she owned and now found herself dependent on the kindness of strangers. Strangers with secrets, it seemed. She wondered about Yates Quinn's sister and what had happened to her, but good manners prevented her from prying. After washing away the dirt and fear of the day, Blaire changed into the borrowed dress. It fit well enough, though the bodice was a bit loose. She did her best to tidy her hair, using the simple bone combs she found on the dresser to pin it back into a semblance of order. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Yates and Mrs. Winters setting the table. Yates had changed as well, into a clean shirt, his hair damp from washing. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Better?" he asked simply. "Much, thank you," Blaire replied. "And thank you for the loan of the dress." Yates nodded, his expression unreadable again. "It suits you." Supper was a hearty affair: venison stew, cornbread, and fresh churned butter. As they ate, Blaire explained her situation more fully. "My uncle Morris Thompson owned the mercantile in Leadville. When he passed, he left it to me. I was to take over the running of it." "Morris Thompson," Yates mused. "I knew him. Good man, fair in his dealings." "You traded with him?" Blaire asked. "Occasionally. Leadville's grown since they found silver. I go in for supplies about once a month." "When is your next trip?" Blaire tried to keep the eagerness from her voice. "Was planning to go day after tomorrow," Yates replied. "But we need to get you there sooner, I reckon. We can ride in tomorrow if you're up to it." "That would be wonderful," Blaire said. "Though I'm not sure what I'll do once I get there, without the deed." "Do you have any other proof that the store is yours?" "Letters from my uncle. A copy of his will that my lawyer in Boston prepared. But they were all in my trunk." Mrs. Winters clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Perhaps the sheriff can help. Elias Crawford's a reasonable man." "We'll figure something out," Yates assured her. "For tonight, though, you should rest." After supper, Mrs. Winters retired to her quarters in a small, attached dwelling at the back of the house, leaving Blaire and Yates alone by the fire in the sitting room. Blaire found herself studying her rescuer more closely in the flickering light. There was a quiet strength about him that she found reassuring, yet also something guarded in his manner. "You've been very kind," she said. "I don't know how I can repay you." Yates looked up from stoking the fire. "No need. Anyone would have done the same." "I'm not so sure about that," Blaire countered. "The world isn't always as full of good Samaritans as we might hope." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe not. But out here we look after each other. Have to. The land doesn't leave much room for selfishness." "How long have you lived here?" "All my life. My father built this place after he came west in '49. Found some gold, enough to buy this land. decided ranching was a steadier way to make a living. He paused, adding a log to the fire. "What about you? What brings a Boston lady to the Colorado Territory?" Blaire smiled wryly. "Is it that obvious I'm from the East? Your accent gives you away. That and your hands." When she looked at him questioningly, he explained, "No calluses. You haven't had to work with them much." Blaire glanced down at her hands, embarrassed. "My father was a banker. He wanted me to marry his business partner's son, a man twice my age with half my wit. When Uncle Morris's letter came, offering me a place here after my father died, it seemed like providence. And now—" She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "And now I'm still certain it was the right decision despite today's complications." Something in Yates's expression softened. "You've got grit, Miss Thompson, that'll serve you well out here." They talked a while longer, the conversation flowing more easily as the evening progressed. Yates told her about his cattle operation, about the challenges of ranching in the high country where winters were harsh and the growing season short. Blaire found herself drawn to his passion for the land, his knowledge of its rhythms and demands. When the mantel clock struck 10, Yates stood. "It's getting late. You should get some rest. We'll head to Leadville after breakfast." Blaire nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "Thank you again, Mr. Quinn." "Yates," he corrected gently. "Yates," she echoed, and something warm fluttered in her chest at the small familiarity. That night, as Blaire lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the distant call of a coyote and the soft creak of the house settling, she thought about the strange turn her life had taken. She had come west seeking independence and adventure. So far, she'd certainly found the latter. As for independence, well, that remained to be seen. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the curtains and the aroma of coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen. Blaire dressed quickly in the borrowed dress and made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Winters bustling about the stove and Yates already seated at the table, reading what appeared to be a week-old newspaper. "Good morning," Blaire said. Yates looked up, setting aside the paper. "Morning. Sleep well. Better than I expected to, considering the circumstances." Mrs. Winters placed a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Eat up, child. You'll need your strength for the ride to town." Breakfast was a quiet affair, with Yates occasionally commenting on news from the paper. Silver prices were up. There'd been another dispute at one of the mines. The railroad was making progress on the line that would eventually connect Leadville directly to Denver. As they were finishing, a rider approached the house at a gallop. Yates was on his feet immediately, moving to the window. "It's Caleb," he said, his expression concerned. "Something's wrong." He strode out to meet the young man who dismounted hastily in the yard. Blaire and Mrs. Winters followed, standing on the porch as Yates spoke with the breathless rider. "Rustlers hit the north pasture last night," Caleb reported, pushing back his hat. "Took nearly 30 head. Jackson and the boys are tracking them, but they wanted me to fetch you." Yates's jaw tightened. "They're getting bolder." "Third raid this month," Caleb agreed. "Different ranches each time." Yates turned to Blaire, conflict evident in his expression. "I'm sorry, but I can't take you to town today. My men need me." Before Blaire could respond, Mrs. Winters stepped forward. "Don't you worry about that. My nephew's coming by with the wagon this morning to take me to visit my sister. We can drop Miss Thompson in Leadville on the way." Relief washed over Yates's face. "That would be a great help, Mrs. Winters." He turned back to Blaire. "I'm sorry about this." "Don't be," Blaire assured him. "Your cattle are your livelihood. You must go." He nodded gratefully. "I'll come to town as soon as I can to check on you. The Silver Queen Hotel is respectable if you need a place to stay." "Thank you. I hope you catch the rustlers." Yates's expression hardened. "So do I." Within minutes, he and Caleb had ridden out, leaving Blaire with Mrs. Winters. The older woman sighed, watching them go. Those rustlers have been a plague on this valley all spring, taking a few head here and there, but it adds up. The law can't seem to catch them. Is it dangerous? Blaire couldn't help asking, a flutter of worry in her chest for the man who had saved her life. Mrs. Winters gave her a shrewd look. Ranching's always dangerous one way or another, but Yates Quinn can handle himself better than most. She patted Blaire's arm. Now, let's get you packed for town. Nathan should be here within the hour. Nathan Winters proved to be a cheerful man in his 40s, with his aunt's kind eyes and an easy manner. He helped Blaire into the wagon with a gallant bow that made her laugh, and they set off for Leadville under a cloudless Colorado sky. The road followed the river for several miles before turning up through a mountain pass. As they climbed, the view became increasingly spectacular, towering peaks, still capped with snow despite the June warmth, verdant valleys below, and the occasional glint of a stream catching the sunlight. "So you're taking over old Morris Thompson's store," Nathan remarked as they drove. "Good business, that, especially with the mines doing so well." "If I can prove it's mine," Blaire replied, "without the deed." "Folks in Leadville knew Morris well," Mrs. Winters reassured her. "If he wrote letters saying the store was yours, Judge Holcomb will likely accept that as proof enough, especially if you can wire your lawyer in Boston to confirm." This was heartening news, and Blaire felt her spirits lift. By the time they crested the final rise and Leadville came into view, she was feeling cautiously optimistic about her prospects. The town sprawled across a high plateau, surrounded by mountains. Despite being established only a few years earlier when silver was discovered, it had grown rapidly. Wood frame buildings lined the main street, with more substantial brick and stone structures beginning to appear. The chaos of construction was everywhere, new buildings going up, roads being graded, the distant clang of mining operations on the hillsides. Population's nearly 10,000 now, Nathan informed her, was hardly more than a camp when they first struck silver in '77. Mrs. Winters pointed as they drove down the main street. "There's your uncle's store, right on Harrison Avenue." Blaire's heart quickened at the sight of the two-story building with Thompson's Mercantile painted in bold letters across the front. It was larger than she'd expected, with large display windows showing an assortment of goods. "Who's been running it since Uncle Morris passed?" she asked. "His clerk, Henry Dawson," Mrs. Winters replied. "Honest man from what I hear. Been keeping things going until the heir arrived." Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the store. "Here we are, Miss Thompson. Would you like us to come in with you?" Blaire considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, thank you. I think I should do this on my own." Mrs. Winters squeezed her hand. "We'll be at my sister's for 3 days. She lives just at the edge of town, the blue house with the white picket fence on Chestnut Street. If you need anything, you come find us." With heartfelt thanks for their kindness, Blaire descended from the wagon and approached the store. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, announcing her arrival to the middle-aged man arranging goods on a shelf. "Be with you in just a moment," he called without turning. Blaire took the opportunity to look around. The store was well organized and abundantly stocked, with everything from basic necessities to luxury items. Shelves reached to the ceiling, laden with goods. A glass case displayed jewelry and watches, while barrels of flour, sugar, and coffee lined one wall. The air was redolent with the mingled scents of leather, spices, coffee, and the faint tang of tobacco. "Now, how can I help you, miss?" The clerk had finished his task and turned to her with a professional smile. "Mr. Dawson." At his nod, Blaire continued, "My name is Blaire Thompson. Morris Thompson was my uncle. Recognition and relief washed over Henry Dawson's face. "Miss Thompson, we've been expecting you for weeks. Your uncle spoke of you often." "I'm afraid I've had some trouble on my journey," Blaire explained. "My wagon went into Eagle River yesterday when the bridge collapsed. I lost everything, including the deed to the store and all my personal belongings." Concern replaced the relief in Dawson's expression. "That's terrible news. Are you all right?" "I am, thanks to Mr. Quinn. He happened to be nearby and pulled me to safety." "Yates Quinn." When she nodded, Dawson smiled. "A good man. One of the few ranchers who doesn't look down his nose at us mining folk." Blaire explained her situation more fully, and Dawson listened with growing sympathy. "Well, as to the store, I don't think there will be much difficulty," he said when she'd finished. "Your uncle left clear instructions. He had a copy of his will filed with Judge Holcomb, naming you as his sole heir. As for a place to stay until things are sorted out, there are rooms above the store. Your uncle lived there, and they've been kept just as he left them." Relief washed over Blaire. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Dawson. I can't thank you enough for taking care of things in my absence." "It was an honor, Miss Thompson. Your uncle was a fine man, fair and honest in his dealings. The town felt his loss keenly." He hesitated, then added, "If you don't mind my saying so, I think you'll find Leadville a bit different from what you might be used to back east. It's a mining town, rough around the edges, but there are good people here." "I'm sure there are," Blaire replied, "and I'm eager to learn the business. Uncle Morris wrote that you would be willing to stay on and help me get my bearings." "I'd be delighted to," Dawson assured her. "Truth be told, I've been worried about what might happen to the store. It's an important part of the community." They spent the next hour going over the basic operation of the mercantile. Dawson showed her the ledgers, explained their suppliers and delivery schedules, and introduced her to the young stock boy, Timothy, who helped with deliveries and heavy lifting. Finally, he took her upstairs to what would now be her home. The apartment was simply but comfortably furnished, with a sitting room, bedroom, small kitchen, and to Blaire's delight a private bathroom with a proper bathtub, a luxury she hadn't expected to find in a frontier town. "Your uncle believed in modern conveniences," Dawson explained with a smile when he saw her surprise. "Had the plumbing put in last year. Cost a small fortune, but he said it was worth every penny." Left alone in what was now her home, Blaire wandered from room to room, touching the furniture, looking at the few personal items her uncle had kept, a daguerreotype of a woman who must have been his late wife, a collection of books on a shelf, a well-worn armchair positioned by the window overlooking the busy street below. It was all hers now, a new beginning, just as she'd hoped when she left Boston. But standing there, surrounded by a stranger's possessions, Blaire felt a wave of loneliness wash over her. She thought suddenly of Yates Quinn, his quiet strength, the steadiness in his eyes when he'd pulled her to safety. "I've got you," he had said, and in that moment she had believed him completely. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as Blaire settled into her new role. Judge Holcomb, a portly man with bushy side whiskers and a jovial demeanor, confirmed her ownership of the store without difficulty once she'd sent a telegram to her lawyer in Boston and received a reply confirming the existence of the will. Learning the business kept her occupied from dawn until well after dusk. There was so much to absorb: inventory systems, pricing, credit arrangements with regular customers, orders to suppliers in Denver and beyond. Dawson proved to be an excellent teacher, patient and thorough. The townspeople, initially curious about the young woman from the East who had inherited Thompson's mercantile, soon accepted her presence. Many had known her uncle and shared stories about him, filling in the picture of a man she had met only a few times in her childhood. 5 days after her arrival in Leadville, as Blaire was closing up the store for the evening, the bell above the door jangled. She looked up to see Yates Quinn stepping through the doorway, removing his hat as he entered. Her heart gave an unexpected leap at the sight of him. "Mr. Quinn," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "It's good to see you, Miss Thompson." He nodded, a slight smile softening his features. "I see you've settled in." "I have, thanks to Mr. Dawson and the kindness of the townspeople." She gestured around the store. "It's a bit overwhelming, but I'm learning. I've no doubt you'll master it quickly." His eyes took in the store, then returned to her face. "I wanted to check on you, make sure you were all right after everything that happened." "That's very thoughtful of you. Would you like some tea?" "I was just about to close up, but I have a kettle upstairs." Yates hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." She locked the front door and led him up to her apartment. If he felt any awkwardness at being alone with her in her living quarters, he didn't show it. Blaire busied herself with the kettle, aware of him standing by the window, looking out at the street below. "Did you catch the rustlers?" she asked as she set out cups and saucers, her uncle's fine china, she'd discovered. Yates turned from the window. "We tracked them to the territorial border, but they crossed into Utah, beyond our jurisdiction." "I'm sorry to hear that," he shrugged. "We'll get them eventually. They're getting careless, taking more risks. It's only a matter of time." When the tea was ready, they sat in the small sitting room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows. There was something surreal about the domesticity of the moment, this rugged rancher sipping tea from a delicate cup in her parlor, his large, calloused hands looking out of place against the fine porcelain. "How are you really doing?" he asked after a moment, his gaze direct. Blaire considered the question. "Honestly, I'm overwhelmed. There's so much to learn, and I feel like everyone is watching, waiting to see if the Eastern lady can handle running a business on the frontier." "And can you?" she smiled. "I believe I can. It will take time, but I'm not afraid of hard work." "No," he agreed. "I didn't think you were." They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing easily between them. Yates told her more about the valley, about the changing seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. Blaire shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of her dreams for the store, of the improvements she hoped to make. As the sun began to set, Yates reluctantly rose to leave. "I should get back to the ranch before dark." At the door, he paused. "The church is having a social on Saturday. A way to raise funds for the new schoolhouse. If you're not too busy, you might enjoy it. Good way to meet more of your neighbors." Was he inviting her? Blaire wasn't entirely sure, but the idea of seeing him again was appealing. "That sounds lovely." "Good." He settled his hat on his head. 8 o'clock. "I could come by, walk you there if you'd like." Her heart quickened. "I'd like that very much." After he'd gone, Blaire found herself standing at the window, watching his tall figure move down the street. There was something about Yates Quinn that intrigued her, a depth beneath his quiet exterior. A story untold. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. Blaire closed the store early, giving herself time to prepare for the social. She bathed and washed her hair, then faced the limited wardrobe she'd been able to assemble since losing her belongings. A knock at her door revealed Mrs. Winters and her sister, Martha, arms laden with packages. "We thought you might need a few things for tonight," Mrs. Winters explained, bustling into the apartment. "Martha's about your size, and her daughters have left all sorts of dresses behind when they married and moved away." The women unpacked their treasures: 3 dresses, a shawl, a pair of delicate evening slippers, and even a small bottle of lavender toilet water. "This is too generous," Blaire protested. Martha waved away her objections. "Nonsense. They're just gathering dust in my attic. Better they should be worn and enjoyed. With the older women's help, Blaire selected a dress of soft blue silk with a modest neckline and fashionable bustle. They helped her style her hair, pinning the copper waves up with a few strategic curls left to frame her face. When she was ready, Mrs. Winters stepped back, nodding in satisfaction. "You'll be the belle of the social, my dear." "I'm not sure that's my ambition," Blaire laughed, though she had to admit she was pleased with her appearance. "Well, you'll certainly catch Yates Quinn's eye," Martha said with a knowing smile. "And that's no small accomplishment. Half the eligible ladies in the county have set their caps for him over the years." Blaire felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Mr. Quinn is simply being neighborly." The sisters exchanged amused glances but said nothing more on the subject. They left shortly after, promising to see her at the social. At precisely 8 o'clock, another knock came at her door. Blaire opened it to find Yates on her doorstep, looking quite different from the rugged rancher she'd come to know. He was freshly shaven, his usually wind-tousled hair neatly combed. He wore a dark suit that, while not fashionable by Boston standards, fit his broad shoulders well. A silver bolo tie gleamed at his throat. For a moment, he simply stared at her, something like wonder in his eyes. "Miss Thompson," he finally said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "And you look very handsome, Mr. Quinn." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I thought we'd agreed on Yates and Blaire." "So we did, Yates," she conceded, returning his smile. He offered his arm, and she took it, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his suit. They walked through the twilight streets toward the church, where lanterns already glowed and the sound of music drifted on the evening air. The social was held in the church hall, decorated for the occasion with paper lanterns and wildflowers. A small band played in one corner, and tables laden with food and punch lined the walls. Nearly everyone in Leadville seemed to be there, from miners in their Sunday best to the more prosperous merchants and their families. Blaire was introduced to what felt like half the town, names and faces becoming a blur. Everyone was welcoming, if curious about the new owner of Thompson's Mercantile. She found herself repeatedly telling the story of her journey west and the loss of her wagon, though she kept the details of her rescue somewhat vague. Throughout the evening, Yates remained at her side, a steady presence in the swirl of new faces and conversations. He danced with her twice, once a lively Virginia reel that left them both breathless with laughter, and later, a waltz during which Blaire was very conscious of his hand at her waist, the warmth of his palm against hers. "You dance well for a rancher," she teased as they moved across the floor. "My mother insisted," he replied. "Said no son of hers would grow up to be a complete barbarian, even on the frontier." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." A shadow crossed his face. She was. Blaire sensed the weight of loss in those two words but didn't press. Instead, she changed the subject. "Tell me about your cattle. Mrs. Winters mentioned you're known for having some of the best stock in the territory." The shadow lifted as Yates described his breeding program, his plans for expanding his herd, the challenges of ranching at high altitude. His passion for his work was evident in every word, and Blaire found herself drawn to that enthusiasm, to the clear vision he had for his future. As the evening progressed, Blaire became aware of curious glances directed their way. More than once, she caught whispered conversations that ceased abruptly when she or Yates approached. "Why do I feel like we're the main attraction at this social?" she murmured as they helped themselves to punch. Yates grimaced. "Small town, people talk." "About what exactly?" He hesitated, then said in a low voice, about the fact that I haven't attended one of these functions in over 2 years, much less brought a companion." "Oh." Blaire wasn't quite sure how to respond to that. "Is there a reason for not attending or for attending tonight? Both, I suppose." He looked at her then, his hazel eyes serious. "I don't much care for crowds, and after Caroline, my wife, died, I didn't see much point in socializing." The revelation struck Blaire like a physical blow. He was a widower. That explained some of the sadness she'd glimpsed in his eyes, the guarded nature of his responses when personal topics arose. "I'm so sorry, Yates. I didn't know." "No reason you should have," he replied. "It was 5 years ago, childbirth fever. We lost the baby to a little girl." "That's terrible," Blaire said softly, her heart aching for him. "It was." His gaze held hers steadily. "As for why I came tonight, I wanted to see you again. Simple as that." The directness of his answer stole her breath. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the mayor, a portly man with an impressively waxed mustache, announcing that it was time for the auction ladies had prepared picnic baskets, and gentlemen would bid for the privilege of sharing the meal with the maker. "I didn't know about this part of the social," Blaire said, watching as women began bringing forward decorated baskets. "It's a tradition," Yates explained. "Proceeds go to the school fund. I'm afraid I didn't prepare anything. Martha Brandon has an extra basket, Mrs. Winters said, appearing suddenly at Blaire's elbow. "She always makes two, just in case. I told her you might be interested." Before Blaire could protest, a basket festooned with blue ribbons was pressed into her hands, and she found herself being ushered toward the front of the hall with the other ladies. The auction proceeded with much good-natured ribbing and competitive bidding. Blaire watched, amused, as men vied for the chance to dine with the lady of their choice, the auctioneer skillfully driving up the prices for the benefit of the school fund. When it came time for Blaire's basket to be auctioned, she felt a flutter of nervousness. She was still new in town, not yet fully part of the community. Would anyone bid for her basket? "Next up, we have a basket from our newest resident, Miss Blaire Thompson," the auctioneer announced. "Who'll start the bidding?" $5, called a voice from the back, a young miner she'd been introduced to earlier. "10, countered another man, a shopkeeper from down the street. The bidding continued, rising quickly past $20, an impressive sum that had the crowd murmuring in appreciation. Blaire caught sight of Yates, standing with his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. $30, called a new voice, smooth, cultured, with a hint of southern drawl. Heads turned to see a well-dressed man Blaire didn't recognize, standing near the door. He was handsome in a polished way, his suit clearly expensive, a gold watch chain gleaming across his waistcoat. $30 from Mr. Marshall, the auctioneer acknowledged. "Do I hear 35? There was a moment of silence. $30 was a substantial bid, more than most of the baskets had gone for. $50. This time, it was Yates who spoke, his deep voice carrying clearly across the hall. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd, followed by knowing smiles and nudges. $50 from Mr. Quinn, the auctioneer repeated with evident pleasure. "Do I hear 55? The well-dressed stranger Marshall studied Yates for a moment, then shook his head with a slight smile. "The lady's basket is yours, sir. Sold for $50 to Mr. Yates Quinn," the auctioneer declared, banging his gavel with enthusiasm. "A new record for our social, ladies and gentlemen." Amid the applause, Blaire found herself blushing furiously. $50 was an extravagant sum, especially for a simple picnic. As she moved to join Yates, who was settling his account with the treasurer, she noticed the stranger Marshall watching them with interest. "That was very generous of you," she said when she reached Yates's side. "It's for a good cause," he replied, offering his arm. "Shall we find somewhere to enjoy your basket?" They settled on a bench in the church garden, away from the noise of the hall. The night was mild, stars brilliant in the clear mountain sky. Blaire opened the basket to find a feast: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a bottle of lemonade. "I should warn you that I had nothing to do with preparing this," she admitted as she laid out the food. "It's all Martha Brandon's work." Yates chuckled. "I figured as much. Doesn't matter. The food's just an excuse." "An excuse for what?" "To spend time with the lady," he said simply, helping himself to a piece of chicken. They ate in companionable conversation, interrupted occasionally by other couples who had brought their baskets outside to enjoy the evening air. As they were finishing the pie, the stranger from the auction approached their bench. "Miss Thompson, allow me to introduce myself. Everett Marshall." He tipped his hat with a flourish. "I've recently acquired the Silver Star Mine and am new to Leadville myself." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Marshall," Blaire replied politely. Marshall turned to Yates with a nod. "Mr. Quinn, that was quite a bid you placed. The schoolhouse fund is grateful, I'm sure." "Mr. Marshall," Yates acknowledged, his tone neutral but his posture subtly more alert. "I understand you own Thompson's Mercantile now, Miss Thompson," Marshall continued. "I'll be in need of supplies for my operation. Perhaps I could call on you next week to discuss an arrangement." "Of course," Blaire replied. "The store is open Monday through Saturday, 9 until 6. "Excellent. I look forward to it." He tipped his hat again. "Enjoy your evening." As Marshall strolled away, Blaire noticed the tension in Yates's jaw. "You don't care for him," she observed. "Don't know him well enough to have an opinion," Yates replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But," he sighed, "the Silver Star has changed hands 3 times in the past year. Marshall's the latest owner. Word is he bought it cheap after the previous owner had some financial difficulties. And you find that suspicious?" "Let's just say I believe in being cautious around newcomers with money and smooth manners." He paused, then added with a rueful smile, "Present company excepted, of course." Blaire laughed. "I'm flattered to be the exception." The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. When the social began to wind down, Yates walked her back to her apartment above the store. At her door they paused, suddenly awkward. "Thank you for tonight," Blaire said. "I enjoyed myself more than I expected to." "As did I." Yates hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. His touch was warm, his fingers calloused but gentle. "Blaire, I'd like to see you again, properly, not just as a neighbor checking in." Her heart quickened. "I'd like that too. Sunday after church, we could ride up to Crystal Lake. It's beautiful this time of year." "That sounds wonderful." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until Sunday, then." Blaire watched him go, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. She had come west seeking a new beginning, a chance to build a life on her own terms. She hadn't expected to find herself drawn to a man so quickly, especially one as complex and guarded as Yates Quinn. Yet there was no denying the attraction, the sense of connection that had formed between them in the days since he'd pulled her from the collapsing bridge. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Blaire attended services at the small church, where she was again the subject of curious but friendly attention from the congregation. After the service, she returned to her apartment to change into the riding habit Martha Brandon had loaned her, another garment left behind by one of her married daughters. Yates arrived promptly at noon, leading 2 horses, his own mount and a gentle mare for Blaire. They rode out of town, following a trail that wound up into the mountains. The scenery was breathtaking, forests of pine and aspen giving way to meadows carpeted with wildflowers, glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. As they rode, Yates pointed out landmarks, named plants and animals, shared stories of the area's history. Blaire found herself captivated not just by the landscape, but by the man himself, the depth of his knowledge, the evident love he had for this rugged country. Crystal Lake proved to be a small alpine lake nestled in a high valley, its waters so clear that the rocky bottom was visible even at its deepest point. They dismounted by its shore, and Yates spread a blanket in the shade of a stand of aspens. From his saddlebags, he produced a picnic cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples, along with a bottle of surprisingly good wine. "This is perfect," Blaire said, looking out over the lake where sunlight danced on the gentle ripples. "How did you find this place?" "My father brought me here when I was a boy," Yates replied, pouring wine into tin cups. "Said his father showed it to him. Quinn men have been bringing special ladies here for 3 generations. The implication wasn't lost on Blaire. "And have you brought many special ladies here?" He met her gaze directly. "Just one, Caroline, and now you." The simple honesty of his answer touched her deeply. "I'm honored to be included in such select company." They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily between them. Yates told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his father's dreams for the land, about the changes he'd seen as the territory developed. Blaire shared her own stories, her education at a progressive ladies' seminary, her frustration with the limited options available to women in Boston society, her determination to make her uncle's store successful. After they'd eaten, they walked along the lakeshore. Blaire stooped to pick up a flat stone, attempting to skip it across the water's surface. "Like this," Yates said, demonstrating the proper technique. His stone skipped 5 times before sinking. Blaire tried again with slightly more success. "3 skips, I'm improving." "You're a quick study," he agreed with a smile. "At this rate, you'll be out skipping me by next summer." Next summer. The casual reference to a future time they might share sent a pleasant warmth through Blaire's chest. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly packed up the picnic and mounted their horses for the return journey. They were about halfway back to town when they heard the distant rumble of thunder. "Storm's coming," Yates said, glancing at the darkening western sky. "We should pick up the pace." They urged their horses to a faster trot, but the storm moved quickly. Within minutes, large drops of rain began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. Lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that spooked the horses. "There's a line cabin ahead," Yates called over the noise of the storm. "We can wait it out there." They rode hard for another quarter-mile before Blaire spotted a small log structure nestled among the trees. They dismounted quickly, leading the nervous horses to a lean-to shelter attached to the cabin. Once the animals were secure, they dashed for the cabin's door. Inside, it was dim and dusty but dry. Yates moved with practiced efficiency, finding and lighting a lantern that hung by the door, then kneeling to start a fire in the small stone fireplace. "What is this place?" Blaire asked, wringing water from her sodden skirts. "Line cabin," Yates explained, blowing gently on the kindling until flames caught. "Used by ranchers and their hands when working the far reaches of their property. This one's on Quinn land, though I haven't been here in months." The cabin was simple, a single room with a fireplace, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Yates found a stack of woolen blankets and handed one to Blaire. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said, then added hastily, "I'll step outside." Blaire smiled at his gallantry. "And get soaked again. That hardly seems sensible. Turn your back and I'll manage." Yates obediently turned to face the fire, keeping his gaze fixed on the flames. Blaire quickly stripped off her wet riding habit and wrapped the blanket around herself like a shawl. The wool was scratchy but warm against her damp skin. "Your turn," she said, turning her own back to give him privacy. She heard the rustle of fabric as he removed his wet shirt and trousers. "Decent," he announced after a moment. Blaire turned to find him similarly wrapped in a blanket, his broad shoulders and chest visible above it. His hair was damp, curling slightly at the ends, and droplets of water still clung to his tanned skin. She quickly averted her eyes, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain lashing against the cabin's single window, thunder rumbling overhead. "Looks like we might be here for a while," Yates observed, adding another log to the fire. "These mountain storms can last for hours." Blaire should have been concerned about the propriety of the situation alone in a remote cabin with a man she'd known for less than 2 weeks, but strangely, she felt only a sense of security in his presence. "I suppose there are worse places to be stranded," she said, settling onto one of the chairs near the fire to warm herself. Yates found a tin of coffee in the supplies and set water to boil in a small pot. "Hungry?" he asked, checking the shelves. "We've got beans, jerky, hardtack." "I'm fine, thank you. The picnic was quite filling." He nodded, setting about making coffee. The domesticity of the scene struck Blaire, this strong, capable man performing simple tasks in the golden light of fire and lantern, the storm raging outside while they remained snug within. It stirred something in her, a longing for a life she hadn't known she wanted until this moment. As they sipped the strong, hot coffee, sitting on opposite sides of the fire, Blaire found herself studying Yates's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his right eyebrow, the fan of laugh lines at the corner of his eye. "You're staring," he said without looking at her, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I'm observing," she corrected. "There's a difference." Now he did turn to her, his hazel eyes reflecting the firelight. "And what are you observing, Miss Thompson?" "That you're a man of contrasts," she replied honestly. "Hard and gentle, reserved yet forthright, a frontier rancher who quotes Shakespeare." His eyebrows rose at the last observation. "When did I quote Shakespeare?" "At the social. You said the quality of mercy is not strained when misses." Brandon was trying to get everyone to donate more to the orphanage fund. "Ah," he looked impressed. "Most people didn't catch that. I was fortunate to have an excellent education, so I see." He studied her for a moment. "And what else have you observed about me, Blaire Thompson?" The directness of the question, combined with the intimate setting, emboldened her. "That you've known loss but haven't let it embitter you. That you love this land with a passion that goes bone deep. That you're careful with your trust but generous with your help." She paused, then added softly, "That when you pulled me up from that bridge and said I've got you, I believed you completely." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "You were the bravest woman I'd ever seen," he said quietly. "Dangling over that river, certain death below, and you were still trying to find a way to save yourself. Most people would have frozen in terror." "I was terrified," she admitted, "but still fighting. That's what courage is, being afraid but doing what needs to be done anyway." He set his coffee cup aside. "When I lost Caroline and the baby, I thought I'd never feel anything again except duty and obligation. I went through the motions of living, but there was no joy in it." He looked directly at her, his gaze intense. "Then I saw you on that bridge and something woke up inside me, something I thought had died 5 years ago." Blaire's heart hammered in her chest. "Yates." He rose from his chair, moving to kneel before her. "I know it's too soon. We've known each other less than 2 weeks. But I also know that life on the frontier teaches you not to waste time when you find something precious." He took her hand in his. "I'm not asking for promises, Blaire. Just a chance to see where this might lead." She looked down at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers pale against his sun-darkened skin. "I came west to be independent," she said softly, "to build something that was mine alone. I know." He started to withdraw his hand, but she held on. "But I'm discovering that independence doesn't have to mean being alone." She met his eyes. "I'd like to see where this leads to." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then suddenly brilliant. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished, but Blaire didn't move. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened as she responded, her free hand coming up to touch his cheek. When they broke apart, both a little breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "You should know," he said, his voice rough, "that I'm not a man who does things by half measures. If we start this, I'll be courting you with serious intent." "I would expect nothing less," Blaire replied, warmth blooming in her chest. Outside, the storm began to abate, the thunder more distant, the rain lessening to a gentle patter. Inside, they remained close, talking softly by the fire as their clothes dried, sharing stories and hopes, beginning to build the foundation of something that felt both unexpected and inevitable. By the time they were able to ride back to town, the sun was setting, painting the rain-washed landscape in hues of gold and rose. They arrived at Blaire's apartment as dusk was falling, both aware of the curious glances from the few townspeople still on the streets. "There will be talk," Yates said as he helped her dismount. "Let them talk," Blaire replied with more bravado than she felt. "We've done nothing wrong." "No, we haven't," he agreed, "but I'd still like to call on you properly in the coming days, if that's agreeable to you." "Very agreeable," she said, smiling up at him. He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, before mounting his horse. "Good night, Blaire Thompson." "Good night, Yates Quinn." She watched him ride away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Whatever came next, she was no longer facing it alone. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Blaire immersed herself in learning the business, gradually taking over more responsibilities from Henry Dawson, who proved to be an excellent mentor. The store was doing well, particularly as summer brought an influx of new miners and their families to Leadville. Yates called on her regularly, sometimes for formal outings, dinner at the hotel's restaurant, concerts at the newly built opera house, and sometimes just to bring her wildflowers he'd found on the range or to share a cup of coffee before he rode back to his ranch. Each visit deepened their connection, their conversations ranging from books they'd read to dreams for the future, from the practicalities of their respective businesses to philosophical discussions about life and its meaning. There were challenges, too. Everett Marshall, true to his word, had become a customer of the mercantile, placing large orders for his mining operation. While Blaire was grateful for the business, she couldn't help but notice the way Marshall watched her, his interest clearly extending beyond commercial matters. "He asked me to accompany him to the Independence Day celebration," she told Yates one evening as they walked along Harrison Avenue after dinner. Yates's jaw tightened. "And what did you tell him?" "That I already had an escort, of course." She squeezed his arm. "He seemed to take it well enough, though he mentioned that his invitation remains open should my circumstances change." "Persistent," Yates muttered. "Presumptuous," Blaire corrected. "But harmless, I think." Yates didn't look convinced, but he let the matter drop. More worrying were the increasing reports of cattle rustling in the valley. Several ranches had been hit, including Shadow Creek. The thieves seemed well organized and familiar with the area, leading some to suspect they had an informant in Leadville. "Sheriff's forming a posse," Yates told Blaire one July afternoon as he helped her unload a shipment of goods that had arrived on the stagecoach. "We're going to patrol the high pastures in shifts. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Could be," he admitted. "Rustlers won't want to be caught. They're looking at prison time if they are." That night, after Yates had returned to his ranch, Blaire found it hard to sleep. The thought of him riding out with the posse, potentially facing armed criminals, filled her with anxiety. In the 2 months since he'd pulled her from the bridge, he had become the center of her world, his steady presence a foundation she hadn't known she was seeking. The Independence Day celebration brought the entire town together. Flags and bunting decorated Harrison Avenue. A parade was planned, and the festivities would culminate in a display of fireworks, a special shipment from Denver that had arrived on the morning stage to much excitement. Blaire closed the store at noon and spent the afternoon preparing for the evening. She would be wearing her finest dress, a new creation she'd ordered from Denver, deep green silk that complemented her copper hair and fair complexion. As she was pinning up her hair, there was a knock at her door. Expecting it to be Yates, who had promised to escort her to the celebration, she was surprised to find Caleb, the young ranch hand, on her doorstep. "Miss Thompson," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Quinn sent me. He's been delayed. Posse caught wind of rustlers near Battle Mountain and rode out to investigate. He asked me to escort you to the celebration and said he'd join you as soon as he could." Disappointment washed through Blaire, followed quickly by concern. "Are they expecting trouble?" Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Quinn didn't say, madam. Just asked me to make sure you got to the celebration safely and to tell you he's sorry for the delay." Blaire nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Caleb. Give me a moment to finish getting ready." The celebration was in full swing when they arrived. Main Street had been transformed into a fairground, with booths selling food and drink, games of chance and skill, and a bandstand where musicians played patriotic tunes. Children ran about with sparklers, their faces sticky with candy and excitement. Blaire did her best to enjoy herself, chatting with neighbors, applauding the parade, but her thoughts kept straying to Yates and the posse. What if there was trouble? What if he was hurt? "You seem distracted, Miss Thompson," a smooth voice observed. She turned to find Everett Marshall at her elbow, immaculate as always in a tailored suit. "Is your cowboy escort not to your liking?" She bristled at his presumption. "Caleb has been a perfect gentleman." "But yes, I am concerned for Mr. Quinn and the others. They're pursuing cattle thieves." "Ah, yes, the mysterious rustlers." Something in Marshall's tone made Blaire look at him sharply. "A troubling situation, to be sure." "You don't seem particularly troubled by it," she observed. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Mining concerns me more than ranching, my dear. Different worlds entirely." He offered his arm. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the bandstand? The mayor is about to make a speech, and we should have a good view." Reluctantly, Blaire allowed him to lead her through the crowd, Caleb following a few paces behind. As they neared the bandstand, she caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the gathering. Yates, dismounting from his horse, his expression grim as he scanned the crowd. Excusing herself from Marshall's company, she made her way quickly to Yates's side. "You're back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Is everything all right?" "No," he replied tersely. "Rustlers got away, but we found something interesting. Need to talk to the sheriff." His gaze shifted past her to where Marshall stood watching them. "Did he bother you?" "Not at all," Blaire assured him. "What did you find?" Yates hesitated, then said in a low voice, "Papers. In a camp the rustlers abandoned when they heard us coming. Detailed information about ranch operations, guard schedules, which pastures had the most valuable stock." His jaw tightened. "Someone in town is feeding them information. Who? Don't know yet, but we're going to find out." Before they could discuss it further, The mayor's voice boomed out over the crowd, calling for attention. As the speech began, a predictable paean to American liberty and the brave pioneers who had settled the West, Yates took Blaire's hand, drawing her slightly away from the press of people. "I'm sorry I wasn't here to escort you," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance. "You look beautiful, Blaire." "Thank you," she replied, smiling up at him. "And you're forgiven. Catching rustlers is rather more important than playing escort." "Not to me," he said simply, and her heart skipped a beat at the sincerity in his voice. The rest of the evening passed in a whirl of activity, more speeches, dancing in the street to the music of the band, a community supper laid out on long tables set up in the town square. Throughout it all, Yates remained at Blaire's side, his hand often finding hers, his eyes rarely leaving her face. As darkness fell, the crowd moved to the edge of town where the fireworks would be set off. Yates led Blaire to a small rise where they could watch in relative privacy. "I've been thinking," he said as they waited for the display to begin, "about the future." Blaire turned to him, her heart suddenly racing. "What about it?" "About what I want it to look like." He took both her hands in his expression serious in the gathering darkness. "When I pulled you up from that bridge, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. I thought I knew what my future held running the ranch, growing old alone with my memories. But you showed me there could be more." "Yates," she began, but he shook his head. "Let me finish, or I might lose my nerve." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Blaire Thompson. I think I started falling for you the moment you looked up at me with those determined eyes, refusing to let fear win even when you were dangling over a raging river." The first firework exploded overhead, casting a red glow over them. Yates continued, his voice steady despite the noise. "I know it's only been 2 months. I know some might say it's too soon. But out here, we learn not to waste time when something true comes along." He released her hands to reach into his pocket, drawing out a small velvet box. Blaire's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a ring, a modest but beautiful sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he said. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He dropped to one knee before her, the fireworks continuing to burst overhead in a cascade of color and light. "Blaire Thompson, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, share my home, bear my children, grow old with me under these western skies?" Tears welled in Blaire's eyes, spilling over as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Yates Quinn, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. Above them, the grand finale of the fireworks erupted, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating their commitment. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Yates pressed his forehead to hers. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado Territory, Blaire Thompson." "Soon to be Blaire Quinn," she reminded him, the name feeling right on her tongue. They were still embracing when a commotion broke out in the main part of town. Shouts and the sound of running feet carried clearly in the night air. "Fire!" someone yelled. "Fire at the Silver Star Mine office." Yates tensed, his expression changing from joy to concern in an instant. "Stay here," he told Blaire, but she was already gathering her skirts. "I'm coming with you." They hurried back toward town to find a crowd gathered around a small building that served as the mine's administrative office. Flames licked at the windows, and men were forming a bucket brigade from the nearest well. "Where's Marshall?" Yates asked a bystander. "Haven't seen him," the man replied. "Office was empty when the fire was spotted. It took nearly an hour to extinguish the blaze." By then, the building's interior was gutted, though the stone walls had prevented the fire from spreading to neighboring structures. Sheriff Crawford moved through the crowd, questioning witnesses. When he reached Yates and Blaire, his expression was grim. "Doesn't look like an accident," he said in a low voice. "Door was forced, and there's evidence someone went through the safe before the fire started." "Marshal," Yates asked, "missing, so's his horse. And something else interesting. Jake at the livery says 6 horses were stolen tonight, right during the fireworks when everyone was distracted." Yates's jaw tightened. "The rustlers. Looks that way." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "I'm forming a posse at first light. We'll track them." "I'll be there," Yates promised. As they walked back to Blaire's apartment, she could feel the tension in Yates's body, the way his hand occasionally strayed to the revolver at his hip. "You think Marshall was involved with the rustlers?" she asked when they reached her door. "It's starting to look that way," Yates replied. "The timing's too convenient otherwise." Blaire remembered Marshall's dismissive attitude when she'd mentioned the rustlers earlier that evening, the odd note in his voice. "Be careful tomorrow," she said, laying a hand on Yates's chest. "If they're desperate enough to set fires and steal in the open, they're dangerous." "I'll be careful," he promised, covering her hand with his own. "Got too much to live for now." His kiss goodbye was tender but brief, both of them aware of the early start he faced the next day. As Blaire watched him walk away, the ring on her finger caught the moonlight, a tangible reminder of the commitment they had made amid the celebration and chaos of the evening. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching July day. Blaire opened the store as usual, though her mind was far from business. The posse had ridden out at first light, Yates among them. They expected to be gone for several days, following the rustlers' trail wherever it led. Mid-morning, Henry Dawson burst into the store, his usually calm demeanor visibly disturbed. "Miss Thompson," he said, "you need to close up and come with me, now." "What's happened?" Blaire asked, alarmed by his urgency. "It's Mrs. Winters. She's at the doctor's office. Had a fall at the ranch and hurt herself badly. Been asking for you." Without hesitation, Blaire locked the cash box and turned the sign on the door to closed. She followed Dawson through town to the doctor's small office near the hotel. Inside, she was met not by the doctor or Mrs. Winters, but by Everett Marshall and 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. "What is this?" she demanded, turning to Dawson in confusion, only to find him looking apologetic but determined. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson," he said, "but they've got my boy. Said they'd hurt him if I didn't bring you here." Marshall stepped forward, all pretense of gentility gone from his manner. "Your fiancé and his friends are causing me considerable trouble, Miss Thompson. I need leverage to ensure my safe passage out of the territory." "You're the one behind the rustling," Blaire said, the pieces falling into place. "Using the mine as a cover for your real business." "Smart lady," one of the other men said with a leer. "Boss always had good taste." "Shut up," Marshall snapped. He turned back to Blaire. "Yes, I've been coordinating the operation. Quite profitably until Quinn and his rancher friends got too close. Now I need to leave, and quickly. You're my insurance policy." "Yates will kill you if you harm me," Blaire warned, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "That's rather the point," Marshall replied coolly. "He won't risk your safety. Now, we're going to walk out of here calmly and mount the horses waiting behind the building. If you scream or try to run, Dawson's son will pay the price." "Understood," Blaire nodded, her mind racing. They couldn't have gone far with the boy. Tommy was only 10, and the Dawsons lived above the tailor shop just down the street. Outside, 3 horses waited. Marshall roughly bound Blaire's hands before lifting her onto one of them. "Keep up," he ordered as he mounted his own horse. "We've got a long ride ahead." They rode out of town by back alleys, avoiding the main street where someone might question the sight of Blaire bound and clearly under duress. Once clear of the buildings, Marshall set a punishing pace, heading west toward the mountains. Blaire tried to keep track of their route, looking for landmarks she might recognize. They were following a trail she and Yates had ridden several times, one that led eventually to a pass through the mountains and into the next valley. After several hours of hard riding, they stopped by a small stream to rest the horses. One of Marshall's men untied Blaire's hands so she could drink, but kept a firm grip on her arm. "Why cattle rustling?" she asked Marshall as he filled a canteen. "Isn't mining profitable enough?" He smiled thinly. "Mining requires investment, time, labor. Stealing cattle that others have raised and cared for is much more efficient. And when the Silver Star didn't produce as expected, you turned to theft entirely," she guessed. "Smart as well as beautiful," Marshall conceded. "The mine was never more than a convenient front, gave me a reason to be in the area, access to information." He studied her thoughtfully. "You know, in different circumstances, I might have courted you properly. A woman of your intelligence would be an asset." "I'd rather die," Blaire replied evenly. Marshall shrugged. "As you wish. Though I hope it doesn't come to that. I have no particular desire to harm you, Miss Thompson. You're merely a means to an end." They remounted and continued their journey. As the day wore on, Blaire's body ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and fear gnawed at her. Would Yates realize she was missing? Would he connect her disappearance to Marshall? And even if he did, how would he find her? As night fell, they made camp in a small clearing surrounded by pines. Marshall's men built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and bacon. Blaire was given food and water but kept under close watch, her hands bound again once she had eaten. "Get some rest," Marshall advised. "We leave at first light." Sleep seemed impossible under the circumstances, but exhaustion eventually overcame fear, and Blaire drifted into a fitful slumber. She dreamed of Yates, of the bridge, of falling endlessly into the churning river below. She awoke to the sound of voices, Marshall arguing with one of his men. "Should have been here by now," the man was saying. "Something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong," Marshall hissed. "They're probably just being cautious. We wait." Blaire kept her eyes closed, listening intently. It seemed they were expecting others to join them, the rest of the rustling gang, perhaps. The fact that these others were late was clearly concerning Marshall, though he was trying not to show it. The day passed with increasing tension. Marshall paced the small clearing, frequently checking his pocket watch and scanning the trail they had followed. By afternoon, even he could no longer hide his concern. "Something's happened," he muttered. "We need to move." They packed quickly, Marshall and his men arguing in low voices about which route to take. Finally, they settled on continuing over the pass, reasoning that if their companions had been caught or followed, it would be safer to avoid the main trails. As they rode, Blaire noticed that their pace had increased, and Marshall frequently looked back the way they had come. Was it possible the posse was on their trail? Hope flared in her chest, only to be dampened by the realization that if Marshall felt threatened, he might be more likely to harm her. They had just started the ascent to the pass when the sound of a gunshot cracked through the air. Marshall's horse reared in panic, and he had to struggle to control the animal. One of his men wasn't so fortunate. He was thrown as his mount bolted, landing hard on the rocky ground. Ambush. The remaining man shouted, drawing his pistol. "Hold your fire," called a familiar voice from the rocks above. "You're surrounded, Marshall. Let the lady go and maybe you'll live to see trial." Yates's voice. Blaire's heart leaped, but her relief was short-lived as Marshall grabbed her roughly from her saddle, using her as a shield while he pressed a pistol to her temple. "Back off, Quinn," he shouted. "Or she dies right here. You shoot her, you're a dead man, Yates replied, his voice deadly calm. There are 6 rifles aimed at you right now. You won't take 2 steps. Marshall's arm tightened around Blaire's waist. I'm leaving with her. When I'm safely away, I'll let her go. No, you won't, Yates said. We both know that. Blaire could feel Marshall's tension, the slight tremor in the hand holding the gun. He was afraid, and afraid men made dangerous decisions. Yates, she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Remember what you said about courage. There was a pause then. I remember. Being afraid but doing what needs to be done anyway, she quoted. Then, gathering all her courage, she went limp in Marshall's grasp, dropping her full weight suddenly. Caught by surprise, Marshall's grip loosened. It was all the opening Blaire needed. She twisted violently, breaking free of his hold and diving to the ground. A shot rang out, and Marshall cried out in pain, the pistol falling from his hand as red bloomed on his shoulder. Figures converged from the rocks, the sheriff, several men Blaire recognized from town, and Yates, moving faster than the rest. He reached her first, gathering her into his arms, his face a mask of relief and residual fear. Are you hurt? He demanded, his hands moving over her, checking for injuries. No, she assured him, trembling with reaction now that the danger was past. I'm all right, just frightened. He held her close, his heart pounding against her ear. When we found out you were missing, I thought I'd lost you. How did you find me? She asked. Dawson, Yates explained. As soon as Marshall and his men left town with you, he went straight to the sheriff, told us everything. We rode out after you while the rest of the posse continued tracking the main gang. His arms tightened around her. We captured them yesterday, the whole operation. Found all the stolen cattle and evidence linking Marshall to the thefts. Sheriff Crawford approached, leading a bound and sullen Marshall. Miss Thompson, he said, I'm mighty glad to see you safe. This one's going to hang for what he's done. Rustling's a capital offense in Colorado territory. Marshall glared at them both, but said nothing as he was led away to where the other prisoner, his remaining henchman, was already secured. Once they were alone again, Yates cupped Blaire's face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. When I said I've got you on that bridge, I meant it for always. I failed you today. No, she contradicted firmly. You found me. You saved me. Again. We saved each other, I think, he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And I intend to keep doing that for the rest of our lives. The journey back to Leadville was slower and far more pleasant than the outward trip had been. Yates kept Blaire close to his side, frequently reaching out to touch her hand or shoulder, as if reassuring himself that she was truly safe. When they arrived in town, news of Marshall's capture and Blaire's rescue had preceded them. A crowd gathered in the street, cheering as they rode in. Henry Dawson pushed through to meet them, his young son at his side. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I can't begin to express how sorry I am for my part in this. If anything had happened to you, you did what any father would do, Blaire assured him, dismounting with Yates's help. And then you did the right thing by going to the sheriff. There's nothing to forgive. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Marshall and his gang were transported to Denver for trial, accompanied by Sheriff Crawford and several witnesses, including Yates. The stolen cattle were returned to their rightful owners, and the community began to settle back into its normal rhythms. When Yates returned from Denver, he came directly to the store, finding Blaire in the midst of inventory. Without a word, he took her in his arms and kissed her thoroughly, oblivious to the amused glances of customers. Marshall and his men have been sentenced, he told her when they finally broke apart. They'll hang next month. Blaire nodded, somber despite her relief. Justice is served, but it's still a grim business. Yes, Yates agreed, but it means the valley is safe again." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the engagement ring that had somehow remained on her finger throughout the ordeal. "Which brings me to another matter. How soon can you be ready for a wedding?" Blaire laughed, surprised by the abrupt change of subject. "That depends." "How soon were you thinking?" "Next week," he replied promptly. "I've waited long enough to make you my wife, Blaire Thompson. Nearly lost you twice now. Don't want to tempt fate a third time." "Next week," she repeated, considering. "It would have to be a simple ceremony." "I don't need fancy," he assured her. "Just you, me, a preacher, and whatever friends you want to invite." "Then next week it is," she decided, her heart light with happiness. "Saturday." "Saturday," he confirmed, sealing the agreement with another kiss. The wedding was held in the small church where they had first attended the social together. Despite the short notice, it seemed half the town turned out for the occasion. Blaire wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha Brandon had helped her make, with Mrs. Winter's lace veil completing the ensemble. As she walked down the aisle on Henry Dawson's arm, who had insisted on the honor of giving her away, Blaire's eyes were fixed on Yates, waiting for her at the altar. He stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face, his expression one of wonder and deep joy. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates gathered Blaire in his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Mrs. Quinn," he murmured against her lips. "Mr. Quinn," she returned, her smile radiant. The celebration afterward was held at Shadow Creek Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, food and drink in abundance, and an atmosphere of genuine goodwill that wrapped around the newlyweds like a blessing. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Yates led Blaire away from the festivities to a quiet spot by the creek that gave the ranch its name. They stood together, his arm around her waist, watching the fading light play across the landscape. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Though I must admit, when I decided to come west, this isn't quite what I had in mind." "No." He turned her in his arms, his expression curious. "What did you have in mind? Independence?" "Adventure. Building something of my own." She smiled up at him. "I never expected to find love as well." "Sometimes the best journeys take unexpected turns," Yates said, his hands gentle on her waist, "like a bridge collapsing and changing the course of two lives forever." "I'm glad it was you who found me that day," Blaire said softly. "I'm glad it was your voice that said I've got you." "And I always will," he promised, drawing her close for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a future that had begun with a broken bridge, a daring rescue, and words that would echo through their lives. "I've got you." 5 years later, Blaire stood on the porch of Shadow Creek Ranch, watching as Yates taught their 4-year-old son, Robert, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played at her feet, carefully arranging pebbles in patterns only she understood. The years had brought changes. The ranch had prospered, expanding its operations to include a small horse breeding program that was gaining reputation throughout the territory. Thompson's Mercantile, now managed by Henry Dawson while Blaire split her time between town and ranch, had grown as well, adding a second location in the new mining settlement that had sprung up 10 miles to the north. Leadville itself had continued to thrive, the population now over 15,000. The railroad had finally reached them, bringing easier access to goods and markets, and with it, a new level of prosperity. But the greatest treasures of those 5 years were the family they had built together. Robert with his father's hazel eyes and determined spirit, Elizabeth with copper curls like her mother's and a laugh that could melt the winter snow. And the new life Blaire carried beneath her heart, a secret she planned to share with Yates that very evening. As she watched, Yates lifted Robert from the pony's back and swung him high in the air, their son's delighted squeals carrying across the yard. Catching sight of Blaire on the porch, Yates set the boy down and said something that sent him running toward the house. "Mama," Robert called. "Did you see? I rode all by myself." "I saw," Blaire confirmed, bending to hug him. "You were very brave." "Like Papa," the boy declared proudly. "Yes, just like your papa." Yates joined them, scooping up Elizabeth, who immediately began patting his face with her small hands, a game they played often. "What's this serious expression for?" he asked Blaire, noting the thoughtful look in her eyes. "I was just thinking about how fortunate we are," she replied. "How blessed." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Blaire leaned her head against Yates's shoulder, his arm warm around her. "Do you ever think about that day at the bridge?" she asked. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't happened to be checking your fence line at that exact moment." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer to think it wasn't chance at all, but destiny." Blaire smiled. "The romantic rancher emerges." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Only with you, Mrs. Quinn." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Only ever with you." She sat up, turning to face him. "I have news," she said, taking his free hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need a bigger table for Christmas dinner this year." Yates's eyes widened, then softened with wonder. "A baby, you're certain?" "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday," she nodded. "Due in January." The joy that spread across his face was as bright as it had been on their wedding day 5 years earlier. He gathered her close, his kiss tender and reverent. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For this, for our children, for saying yes when a dusty rancher asked you to share his life." "Best decision I ever made," Blaire assured him, settling back against his chest. They sat in contented silence for a long time, watching the moon rise over the mountains that had become home. Blaire thought of all they had built together, not just the successful businesses or the beautiful family, but the deep, abiding partnership that had grown from that first moment of connection on a collapsing bridge. "I've got you," Yates had said that day, and he had kept his promise in every way that mattered. Through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, they had held fast to each other, building a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone. As they finally rose to go inside, Yates paused to look out over the moonlit ranch, the land his father had claimed, that he had nurtured, that their children would someday inherit. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming west, taking over the store, all the hardships you faced?" Blaire followed his gaze, seeing not just the physical beauty of the landscape, but the life they had forged within it. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be, with you, with our family under these western skies." Yates smiled, drawing her close for one more kiss before they went inside to the warmth of the home they had built together, a home founded on courage, nurtured by love, and promising a future as vast and beautiful as the Colorado mountains surrounding them.